Stu Rich here with our next interview in the Facilities Management Minutes series. In this series, we introduce you to some of our industry's most interesting thought leaders so you can hear their insight and experience directly from them. Today's interview is with Wanda Lenkewich, president of Chinook Systems. Wanda built her business around the very challenging problems of building commissioning. Essentially, she helps new facility owners build the information systems necessary to maintain and operate facilities from the information delivered from design and construction. Wanda is one of those people whose life speaks volumes about the value of persistence. If you like these interviews, please tap the like and subscribe buttons to make sure you are notified of new content as it's released. And if there is someone you want to hear from in the series, let us know in the comments below or by reaching out to marketing@cartograph.com. Now, let's meet Wanda. Wanda, thanks very much for making the time to visit with us in this interview series. This is a conversation I've been looking forward to very much. Your business and what you do is at this very interesting intersection between design and build and operate. And you, as much as anybody I know, have that opportunity to build those bridges from design, build to operate. But that's kind of starting at the end of the story rather than the beginning of the story. So can you share with our viewers here a little bit about your own journey? How did you get into this business and how did you get to where you are in the world today?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I feel honored to be able to talk about our history and how it has had maybe even just a small impact on extending the life of buildings and making them more efficient and helping people do their jobs better. And so I really appreciate having the opportunity. I think that we have been in a really nice spot with respect to having the ability to actually provide solutions. So there's so many that provide services and there's so many that provide technology, but to be able to combine those two into solutions that help the life cycle of facilities and critical infrastructure has been really rewarding. And you're right, it definitely has some things, while things change and while we move forward, there's a lot of things that stay the same. And so it's, I've definitely seen things come around and go around and come around and go around again. So I'm happy to share some of that with you. But I just think that we're in such an amazing industry because there is no two buildings that are the same. There's no two clients that are the same. And so it's, having that ability to walk into kind of an unknown every time you go into a new building or meet a new client or work on a new design build project or be involved in a new design, be involved in optimization of buildings, et cetera. It's always exciting because there's never 2 days that are the same. So it's great. But as far as me personally goes, I don't know. I think my journey started when I was really young. I'm a farm girl, and so I had a really kind of unique upbringing in the sense that I had the ability to, be out in the field with my dad, fixing tractors, doing whatever. I remember when I was a kid, it was like he would do things like send us into the garage and say with a bolt and say, "Go find me a nut," right? And so, we'd go in and we'd go through all the bins and try and find nuts to bolts and bring it back to him. And he'd go, "No, no, 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 no." He said, "You brought me a coarse thread. You need a fine thread. Go back." right? And so this is the kind of thing that I grew up with from the time I was really little. And so always being able to, put yourself in a position where things were broken and had to be fixed. There was a obviously strong emphasis on the ability to troubleshoot, which has carried me well, I think. And then on the flip side, I mean, I did the things that were expected of not only girls growing up, but all the kids growing up. I learned how to cook. I learned how to, be creative. I, have done some art. I've done some music, and so I think I was very fortunate, even though growing up in a very rural environment with, not a lot of exposure, I guess the things that I did get were very foundational to where, my passion is today, which is like combining that, really difficult engineering side of it with the innovation and the creativity. And so I think it comes from a very young age. And then as I was going through school, it was one of those things where it's like, I found myself drawn to math and physics, more so than anything else. And I was in a very small school, and they only offered physics every 2 years. And so I found myself, finishing my high school physics over 2 years when I was like 16 years old. So there was something to that. I didn't really know what it was. And as I was trying to make my decisions about going to college, my physics teacher was very instrumental in my decision, because I remember having the conversation with him as to if he felt that I could do engineering. And so it was like one of those moments, right, where you have a very it's one of those things where it's like a door that opens, right, and you either choose to walk through it or you don't. And that was one of those things for me. And so when he said, "Yeah, no problem, go for it," it kind of started my journey. And and then on the flip side, so I started college, and I went to the open house for my college, and I talked to all of the instructors, and I'll never forget my hydraulics instructor said to me, "So, Wanda, you plan on taking mechanical industrial engineering?" And I said, "Yes, I do." And he said, "Well, not very many girls come through this class." And I said, "Oh, really?" And he said, "Well, and of anybody who's ever come through this class, none of them have ever completed the 2-year program." I said, "Well, I guess I'll be the first." And so indeed I was. I was in a building of 200, and I was the only female in the building, and it was interesting because of the way I grew up. I knew I was the only one, but I didn't really feel like I was out of place because frankly, some of the things that I learned while I was on the farm, I was way further ahead than some of the guys in our class who I laughed were the city slickers in the room who had really never touched a real piece of equipment before. And so it was kind of fun. But yeah, that was really my start. And then of course I had to win a bet, because my dad decided that he was going to bet me $200 that I wouldn't complete my schooling. And so, I had to collect on that one too. But yeah, that was my start. Once I graduated from college, I went into road construction at the time, material testing for the highways, and then I found myself in the manufacturing sector. I worked for a machine tool company, and I did all of the installations, programming training for computer numerical controlled machines. And so I ended up being one of only 2 women in North America in machine tool service at the time. So that was a lot of fun too. And I mean, there's just the stories, right? And this is my story and what happened to me. But I remember when I first started with the company, one of my first weeks was actually going to a machine tool show and actually working the booth. And this was way back in the day when girls were actually hired to work the booth, not because of their knowledge of machines. And so, so those were some of the things that I had to battle. But I had fun with it because, the guys used to think that, they were smart and they'd come over and try and, ask me a technical question and think that I wasn't going to be able to answer the question because they didn't really know who I was. And so I always found it interesting to be able to, kind of give them that, I guess, surprise that, that I wasn't what I seemed to be. So the machine tool industry then took me into government, where I started working with buildings. And I recall when I did my interview with one of the technical services managers, I got questions that were technical, and I was really unsure of myself when I went into the interview because it was because I was going into the interview as an HVAC specialist, and I had to look up what HVAC was before I even went into the interview, because I had never been into buildings. I was in the manufacturing world. And so anyway, he started asking me questions, and I was like, I don't know what HVAC is. And so he then looked at what the transferable skills were, and he started asking me questions about pumps. And I'm like, oh, okay, And so I told him a story about a coolant pump, and then, so he knew that I had some kind of aptitude. But then there was also the questions that went with, well, we do a lot of remote work, and you're going to find yourselves in the Arctic someday with a bunch of guys, and, what are you going to do? And so I had to answer those kind of questions also. And so typically my answer was that, that they would get one chance to be good people. And if they weren't, then I'd be like on the next plane out. So do your job yourself, right? So there was a lot of that, but it was just what happened at the time. So I was the only female in our technical services division in the government of Canada, and did a lot of traveling. And that was really, well, my love for technology started right away, because in the machine tool industry, it was in the early days of computer numerically controlled machines. And so I just fell into programming, and I loved it. And I loved that ability to actually program something and then have it actually produce a part in the end. And I also loved the fact that I could teach other people how to do that. So I would, before I would go out to a site, I would get them to send me drawings of a part that they wanted to machine, and I would build my training program around that part, so that when I went to set up their machine and train them and teach them how to do it, then when I left, they were in production. They were actually building parts and making money after I had left. So I've always had that that need, I guess, to be creative, but then to have it actually produce something on the other end. And when I started with the government, I was doing mechanical design, and then that was in the early days of AutoCAD, and so I think I started on version, I don't know, 10, way back when, and in the very very early years of 3D, where you'd like hit the button and go away and come back the next morning and hope it had actually produced something for you overnight. Um, it was at that time that I actually got into facilities and facility operations. So I was in my mid-20s, and I had an opportunity to oversee the implementation of our computerized maintenance management system. And so that was kind of really cool in the sense that I was able to use what I had done to date, which wasn't a lot, by the way, of engineering and design, but then to actually be in the spot of helping our district offices implement their maintenance program, utilizing our own government homegrown maintenance management system at the time. So, and then I was on the national committee also that influenced the direction of our technology. So that was really kind of what got me started in the building industry with the aspect of taking design, taking operations, and then in 1991-92, I started doing building commissioning. So our organization was one of the organizations that helped write some of the original guidelines for the Building Commissioning Association, which was PECI way back then. And then, long story short, before I left the government, it was in 1998 where I did a data transfer from commissioning technology to maintenance management technology. I did an ODBC database transfer in 1998. So that was kind of my career up until the point in time where I left the government and started my own business. But it was really the foundation of what I was trying to accomplish in my company, because I looked at building commissioning as a foundation, and selfishly, I want to touch every piece of the life cycle. I want to have some kind of influence over every piece of the life cycle, and I want to have a real influence over the long-term successful operations and maintenance of buildings, and technology is a big piece of that too. So that was where I ended up, and I'll hit pause there for a while.
Well, I'm delighted to know that you won that bet with your dad. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
So in the years since, you have built this company, Chinook Systems. Pretty interesting company. Maybe many of our viewers haven't heard of Chinook Systems. Tell us a little bit about what Chinook does and why that's important for your customers.
Well, again, we're built foundationally on commissioning, and I was always a believer that you had to, again, combine the services with the technology. I started developing our commissioning technology back in the mid 90s, and I just felt that you needed to have a better way of pulling all of that disparate information together, and being able to deliver it in a format that could be used for O&M. So I started developing and marketing our own commissioning software, and I'll never forget when I started presenting it in the early days to the Building Commissioning Association. It was like I would have nightmares because nobody would come to my presentations. I'd bring the technology to the presentations, and they'd have to bribe people to come to my sessions, and it was very disturbing at the time. But I look back on it now, and I think, wow, it was a long time ago, and now I can kind of be proud that I was part of that initial move, because now technology is everywhere in our industry, and there's standing room only at those sessions now. And so I feel like, that some of that and the evolution of that, where I was very much not only, an early adopter, but an early developer of it. And so I look back on it now, and I'm quite proud that I was actually be able to be in that place at that time, and spur the industry forward. So really, Chinook, it was my desire to make sure that I was having a positive influence on the entire life cycle, and bringing not only services but technology to the table, knowing that we needed it. We needed it so badly in the operations and maintenance side of the house.
So it's interesting, as you say, today technology is everywhere, right? And there's all this bright, shiny data being created in design and construction, these beautiful BIM models, and yet it seems to be hard when it comes time to start managing that building, to load the data into your CMMS. There seems to be a mismatch between what owners and operators expect to come out of design and construction and what is actually available to them to help start them on the operations phase. Why is this so hard? What is it that is so difficult about that makes the process of commissioning so difficult?
I think that it's kind of the sheer quantity and of bringing everything together, because as we move through all phases of a project and into O&M, there's stakeholders along the way that they have a job to do, and they don't their job isn't necessarily to look at the entire life cycle of a building or a piece of infrastructure, and so it's self-serving, right? So if you're a designer, you're going to utilize the best design tools that you have to achieve just that. You're a design, and you're a designer, and you're not really necessarily concerned about how it's going to operate. Although most engineers are very concerned about how things are going to operate, but that there's been a change of that in our business too. And then as things transition into construction phase, it's the same thing. I mean, constructors have a huge responsibility when it comes to erecting structures. And when you look at that whole project from start to finish, and from foundations to walls to roofs and then there's the piece that comes together to make it breathe, right? And I had a healthcare client once who likened building systems to the human body, and he talked about the human body eating, breathing, and everything else that goes with a human body. And he did a really amazing analogy between the human body and a facility. And the one thing I'll never forget that he said is that, a building can look pretty on the outside, but it can be, very unhealthy on the inside. And so I've been striving to make sure that the buildings are healthy on the inside. And so one of the things that we always find during construction is that a contractor typically marks the completion of their building or phase by the architectural and structural pieces being done. Oh, this room is done, right? The walls are painted, the carpet's in, but it's not done until it's fully tested and commissioned and it's healthy, right? It's not done just because it has a coat of paint on the walls. And so that's always been one of the challenges for us to, right from the beginning, define what that looks like. What success actually looks like for systems and what it means going into O&M. And so what becomes very challenging is that definition of success, because the definition of success across all of the various different stakeholders is different, right? Everybody's working towards the same end, but their piece of it is different and their priorities are different. And so just trying to be that entity that can, that can connect the dots between all of the stakeholders and understand, because a lot of commissioning agents have been on all sides of the fence. They have been owner operators, they have been designers, they have been MEP coordinators on construction sites or whatever it is. And so they really have had, worn a lot of hats throughout the life cycle. And so it's always what I look for is trying to bring those team members together to define what success is for the owners, and not only just a transition from construction, but what does it mean long term? And we've become an industry that has I liken the services and the technology the same way. If you look back at technology, there was always like enterprise level technology. It did a lot of things. And now, if a piece of technology has any more than 2 use cases, it's like, oh my God, what are we going to do, right? It's like it does more than 2 things. We can't handle it. It's too big. Or we just need to check a box. We just need for it to do this. And I found that over time, like our people have got that way too, right? Where, where when I grew up in the industry, it was expected. It was expected that engineers went out to the field. It was expected that you did your own existing condition surveys, and it was expected that you did your own designs. It was expected that you managed your own construction. It was expected that you actually had to, pay for the change orders of your mistakes, right, and see things work in the field. And then you had to be out there and commission it at the same time and transition it. And then you had to be working with the people who were operating it. And so you definitely were part of the entire life cycle. And I think now, because the industry has become so segregated in many ways, there aren't a lot of people that have experienced the entire life cycle and appreciate every, the role of every stakeholder in it. And they're all very important.
So part of the commissioning process, I think, there are so many different parts of the commissioning process, but part of that process is an information exchange between design, build, and operate, and you're really taking data from different types of systems and then helping to load more operationally focused systems. To what extent do standards help make that process more predictable, more risk-free? The world is awash with standards, right? We've got the National CAD standard, the National BIM standard, we've got COBE, we've got just plenty of standards. how much of the problem of commissioning are eased if a customer, if an owner specifically, has a thoughtful and proactive approach to data standards?
Well, not often we find that there's a thoughtful and proactive approach to data standards. So, I mean, standards are good if they're followed and if they're brought together. And I think that it's critical because you need the standards in order to have the normalization. And so from my standpoint, the most important thing with all of this information coming in and supporting, supporting the life cycle of infrastructure is that it all has to be normalized and parsed. So recently I did a project where we did a point cloud scan to 3D model, and I connected the 3D model to our commissioning application and utilized it for our ongoing commissioning program. And when we were creating the interoperability, the folks who were supporting us on the modeling aspects said, okay, what kind of data do you need in the model? And I'm like, I don't need any data in the model. They're like, what? I said, I don't need any data in the model. And they didn't quite understand that. And I'm like, I have all the data in my database. I don't need it again in the model. What I need in the model is like 3 fields. That's it. You give me 3 fields and you give me the ability to graphically represent that, and I'm good. And so I think we try and overcook things at times too. And instead of putting a lot of thought into how to make it simple, we think that more is better, and more is definitely not better. More just makes a mess that somebody has to maintain. And so that aspect of, for me, normalizing it, reducing the redundancy in the information is really important, and making it easy to maintain, because I think the one thing, we do have a lot of standards around design standards and construction standards, and then of course the Kobe exchange, of which I was involved in really, really early on. And even with Kobe, I couldn't understand it. And it's like, why are you exporting all of this stuff into spreadsheets? I don't get it. Like, we're in the age of databases. Why can't we have a platform that all of this Kobe data comes into, instead of a bunch of spreadsheets that we're importing and exporting everywhere, right? And so it's but it's an evolution, and it's not an easy problem to solve. So I do think that it's configuration management and change management is one of the big things that we really haven't tackled well. So we have standards, and we implement standards at a point in time, but then as we have to operate and maintain, I think that we don't necessarily do the best job that we can at configuration management.
So, in your experience, what are the most common information gaps that you see coming out of design and construction? And as you're in your commissioning process, you're thinking, if only someone had put this information into the process, would have made our lives so much easier.
Well, I think definitely upfront understanding if there's a repository as to where it all should go, because I think that a lot of times it's provided at stages, but then there's gaps. So we build up information, and then, you know, we transfer some of it and the rest of it falls away, and then we build it up again and some of it falls away, and then it all doesn't get through. And so a lot of times the end user doesn't necessarily know where to put all of the information. They may not have the technology to receive the information. They may not have the people to receive the information. It comes in fast and furious too, like especially in construction phase. That information is hitting you hard. All of the submittals are coming in, and just getting, I find just getting final approved copies of all of the submissions in design and construction in a centralized location for the O&M people it's really difficult to do when there's thousands of them potentially that come in, and managing and tracking that information. So I think also that there's information, really good information that gets buried that can kind of come to the forefront too. A lot of really critical information that may be buried in pages and pages and pages of control shop drawings or something like that, right? Where, where if it was presented in a format that, was more usable for long-term O&M, then, we might be better off. But there's, I do think that there's challenges also with being the lack of integration between design and construction teams and O&M teams. And so, the design and construction team, fast and furious, they go through and they build a building, and that team is engaged and they know everything. And then they go away, and all of that knowledge and people take over a building and go, why did they do this? Who made this decision? And you look at it like, why would somebody do something like that? But then if you're not involved in that entire process up front, chances are there were a lot of meetings and a lot of decisions that were made, and everybody makes the best decision that they can at the time, and it's just doesn't get communicated all the way through, and then those people are gone, and there's a loss of information and knowledge. One thing that I've been really trying to encourage owners to do, especially from a commissioning standpoint, where a lot of the new construction projects follow LEED, and so LEED really has the commissioning agent. I mean, getting more and more involved now with setting up properly for ongoing operations. But at one point in time, we would get done construction, and then we'd come in for like a 10-month warranty review and do an interview and go, hey, how's everything going? And and the O&M people would complain about everything, and then and you'd try to resolve any off-season type problems that they were having and whatever. But the reality is that you can't, you just can't expect somebody to just pick up a building and run with it. And so we've been really trying to, we've been trying to encourage owners to keep core people engaged, at least throughout the first year of operations, right? Because everybody goes away. And so, they tend to not want to, keep keep the people who have been in the decision-making process along the way engaged for that first critical year of operations. So I think that would help out a lot, and it would help actually take all of the information, which has been designed and constructed per certain standards, and have that same team that did that actually set it up for success.
So to follow up on that just a little bit, I'm sure you know the Stephen Covey mantra of begin with the end in mind, right? What kind of advice would you have for building and infrastructure owners that that they really think long and hard and deep about before they even talk to the architect for their next project? What should they be thinking about to make sure that the building that comes out the other end of that construction process is one that they're ready and willing and engaged in operating efficiently and effectively?
On the owner side, there's key people that are typically involved in developing their requirements. And so you take a look at any building and the specialties associated with it. So take a museum, and you're going to have the curators involved. You're going to have the people who are really trying to execute the mission of that owner, and then you tend to have the program requirements of this is what it needs to be, this is what we're housing, this is what our mission is, and so then you're designing all of these systems to support them. And so we spend a lot of time developing the requirements and designing the systems to support the mission, but with an expectation that the building is just going to work, right? So you walk into any building, and there's just an expectation from anybody who walks into a building that it's working. It's just magically working, right? And they don't necessarily understand everything that goes into having a building support a mission. I find myself doing things like I walk into a museum or gallery, and I see some big fountain in the middle of a gallery, right, with running water. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's like, how are you managing the humidity in this building when you got like priceless artwork 5 feet away from a fountain, right? And so these are the kind of things that a lot of times those kind of questions don't get answered. And then there's also people that are involved in the early phases, like you can go from an art gallery to, I don't know, like to a shooting range, right? And then you have people who know how to, who are the end users and trainers of a firing range. And, they know exactly what they want, and they need laminar airflow, and they need all of this stuff, and they get it all into their requirements, and they help during the design. And then there seems to even be that gap between, it's like, okay, well, who is actually going to maintain this for us and ensure that all of this upfront work that happened to define all the requirements and build them and get them into design and construct them to meet it and commission it, and who from the operations side has been involved in that and understands all of those requirements, and because they're going to be the ones that are going to have to ensure that it works in the end, and that it can work every day, not just at a certain point in time, but that it can work every day. So it's difficult, and I think it's difficult too because we can go into, I guess, the next stage of just how buildings are operated and maintained, and the people and the people associated with that, because kind of long are the days, not very many buildings now have people who work for the organization that the building was built for operating and maintaining it.
It's interesting as I hear you talk about what success looks like in terms of buildings operations. I tend to come to these conversations from a bit of a technology background, and yet what I hear you talking about is the importance of the people part of that. Who are the people that are managing? Do they have the right experience? Do they have the right training and understanding? Do they understand all of the complexities of the environment that they're managing? So I'm hearing you describe a need for training, a need for people standardization, and that's a terrible way to describe the need, but a way to make sure that you've got the right personnel package to operate your building as much as the need for any kind of technology.
Well, not necessarily, because the technology plays a huge piece in setting people up for success. So one of the difficult things when we transition buildings is that we get all the pieces in onesie twosies, and somebody has to actually put it together as systems. And I think one thing that we do that is really added value to owners from a commissioning perspective is building those systems manuals. And so it's like buildings are built in pieces and parts, and then they're operated by systems. So the technology that supports successful operation of systems is very much growing and developing. And so getting that foundational information across the fence, but then having the ability for the people who are operating buildings to see what they're doing and have it be visual in front of them. I think that's been one of the advancements that has been great, because it's that the visualization piece is really important, especially as buildings get larger and complex. In smaller buildings, I still think that technology is important, but you'll see a lot of owners or maintainers, et cetera, who are in smaller buildings that they don't need a lot of technology. They know their buildings inside and out, and they listen to them. They walk around them, and they're so in tune with how their building lives and breathes. And so when you come to them and say, "Oh, well, you need a 3D model," they're like, "I don't need a 3D model." It's like, I don't need a 3D model, right? So there is a need and an application, but not in all cases. It's not a one size fits all. But then when you get into buildings that are, 1 million square feet, and you can't touch everything every day. You can't walk that building end to end every day, and you have teams of people that are managing it, and you have various different things going on, and you have renovations going on in them all the time, and so they're continually being updated and changed. That in those cases, having really good foundational technology that you can see the impact of a change in a building and see what it's going to do to you, and run analytics and run simulations and do training, and have training videos, and have training tied to models, and have training tied to step-by-step procedures, and have training tied to maintenance manuals, and all of that. I mean, it it's really important, and it's even more so important too because no longer are maintainers staying with buildings for 30 or 40 years. So you have to have the ability to transfer that knowledge or maintain it in real time.
So I'd like to shift the conversation just a little bit. You are unusual, I would say, in this industry in that you are an accomplished and successful woman in a industry that is pretty male dominated historically. A, congratulations and thank you. But B, what kinds of advice would you have for young women coming up in this industry to help them persevere and find their own journey to success?
I mean, I just think that you have to get started somewhere, right? If you have a passion for how things work and you have a curiosity of you have to be curious, and you have to be wanting to dig in and see how things work and see how you know, you also have to be comfortable with there's never a same day twice in our industry. So you just have to embrace the change and know that the change is coming every day, and it's fast and furious, and that it's a great thing to be part of because you never get tired of it. There's just so much going on with buildings and with technology and with equipment, and it's always changing, and it's always being updated. And so I think that, you know, once you have some of the foundational pieces in place, I mean, there's just so many different directions that you can go. And so you can get into our industry and specialize in technology and specialize in modeling, or you can work for, you know, one of the major vendors and you know, be the best that there is at switchgear. You know, it's just it is such a broad industry with so many different avenues that you can take. So I think the word of encouragement is just get started, and just when you find an area that like you just love, just follow it, you know, and expand upon it, and it'll take you somewhere. It'll take you somewhere really cool. But ours is not an industry where you have to do something that you don't like. You know, it's like you know, you may be digging a ditch one day to, you know, digging a trench to lay some conduit or whatever, and you go, don't really like that. But then, you know, tomorrow you may process a submittal and go, oh, I kind of like that, right? Or you may, you know, create a Visio diagram of something, or you may enter a piece of information, and you just find your way. So I just think that to be open-minded, because our industry is so huge and it's so gratifying, and there's a lot of places you can go, and you don't have to get stuck.
So Wanda, our conversation has wandered pretty widely, and we've covered a lot of different topics. What questions have I not asked you that I should have? What other kinds of experience or perspective would you like to share with our viewers that I haven't asked you about yet?
Well, I do think that the one thing that we really have to be cognizant of as we go forward, I know that in our industry, especially where we are, we've focused a lot on energy efficient buildings and sustainability, et cetera. You know, I just think that I would be remiss if I did not make sure that I made everybody aware, if they're not already, of the vulnerabilities that we have in our systems and the importance of cybersecurity as we go forward. We focus a lot on all of the technology and it being as smart as it can be, and that we, the more information the better, the more data the better, the more, and it's really not the case. Our critical infrastructure is being hit every day, being hacked into every day. And so I just want to, as we go forward with our company, I've set up a cybersecurity division for building control systems, and we're also building technology around cyber also. But it's really important that we take cyber into consideration when we're dealing with all of this technology and all of this data and all of this smartness in all of our controls, and make sure that it's built into our processes, not tried to be, baked in versus bolted on, I guess, is the, terms that everybody is using. But it's really critical. We're just seeing that so much data coming through that is like useless information that can introduce some major vulnerabilities and in our ever expanding threat landscape. So all I want to do is, like, I am a technology person and I am a data person, but I just think that us continuing to just collect information for the sake of it, just because we can, without any thought as to what the potential impact it is to our operations and the safe operations of our infrastructure, it's real.
Well, Wanda, thank you very, very much for making your time available to us. We're grateful for your time and your insight, and we look forward to hearing more about the great work that Chinook Systems is doing in the future.
Well, thank you. I appreciate being involved.